Hi everyone and welcome back. I'm Professor Hall and this is our second part of our two-part series on analyzing your audience for technical writing. So if you haven't seen part one, please click on my profile and watch the first part before watching the second. Part one, I talked a lot about analyzing your audience. So last time, the ways in which writers consider their background, needs, interests, and demographic characteristics of the people that they are writing to. We also discussed how a writer can target a majority population when creating a document or presentation intended for a varied audience. And then we talked a lot more about the four different categories of audience, what exactly an expert is, what a technician is, how they're different from an executive, and then also the non-specialist, that lay person or end user. So what does this actually look like on the page? Because it can be kind of easy to talk about these categories, but when it comes to your writing, it can be a little bit more difficult. I don't know why that one just popped in there. So editing and revising for audience. One of the things that I really want to stress in this course and in all of my writing courses, I think that a lot of times when people say I'm not good at writing or I hate writing, it's because they think that you just write something one time, that it's perfect, that you turn it in and you get an A on it if you're in school, or that people who are writers, they're just good at it and that they can just produce something very quickly. In reality, writing is a process. And in a professional situation, you might not have the time to go through all of this, right? You might not pre-write and brainstorm ideas or decide on a purpose for an email. But you might just write your email. You should revise it before you send it. Maybe when you revise it, you rewrite parts, you proofread parts, and then you press send, right? That might not even take as long as you think. If it's 3 or 4 sentences, revising it might just be like, oh yeah, there's a period missing and I spelled the person's name wrong. Or, oh, I don't have a really clear title for my message, right? That header. So when you're revising for audience, you do need to go through steps. The pre-writing first is who is my audience, right? Specifically thinking about what they're going to need, what they're going to want, what their backgrounds and characteristics are. Then, when you get into the writing stage, you're going to explain terms the majority of your audience might not understand, paraphrase. If you are doing a summary, you're going to keep the document's main ideas, but rewrite those ideas in your own words to hit your target audience. You can change the sentence structures when you are revising. Rewrite those sentences so that they are short and clear. You can also, for some types of writing, presentations, reports, a summary, you might have to quote and cite the original material. A lot of times if you're doing a white paper, this is something where you're presenting findings on research and you're going to have to quote and cite that material. So making sure that you cite it correctly for your audience so that they can go and read more about it from the original source. And then other types of writing, you might not have to do that. So if you're just writing instructions, if you're writing a manual, you're not going to necessarily need that citation information. One of the things about citations, a lot of times students think that professors are just asking them to cite things so that they don't plagiarize. And that is, for academia, for college classes, for high school classes, that is really the case. I want you to cite your work so that I can see where you got it from. But really, in technical and professional writing, a lot of times you're citing the work first to show you're not plagiarizing and that you are a person of honesty and integrity. But second, really so that if your executive that you're writing to, for example, needs more in-depth information, if they need to see the complete research study, if you're dealing with an expert who understands the theories behind the product you're creating and they want more information, you're telling them where they can find that original source. So you're summarizing it for them, or you're paraphrasing it for them, or you're quoting it for them, whatever the case may be. But in any of those cases, you're helping your audience know where the original material was from, and also what date the original material is from, where it was published, if the publication is reputable. We talked about how to do that with a summary, and especially an executive summary. So in your first sentence, you're showing, here's the year it was published, here's who wrote it, here are their credentials, right? If I'm doing something for instructions for a medical purpose, or let's say I'm doing a white paper for something in the medical field, or psychology, or human services, those dates are going to be really important, right? For something like psychology or medicine, I want to know that I have the most up-to-date technologies that I'm using, right? The most up-to-date cures, the most up-to-date pharmaceuticals. If I'm doing something for something like human services, or let's say even accounting or bank fraud, what are the laws regarding those? Have the laws changed? If I'm trying to cite a study and there are new laws put in place for how a research study is conducted ethically, I need the most up-to-date information. So all of that's kind of important as well as paraphrasing. But let's talk about wording. What else can you do to meet the needs of your audience? Design. What can you do to meet your audience's needs? As you can see in our picture, clear headings and subheadings so the reader can follow your points. So here the contents, this is kind of like level 1, right? This is what everything's about. These chapter headings here, chapter 1, chapter 2, that's level 2. 1.1 a section would be level 3, and then 1.1.1 would be level 4. We talked about this a little bit before. If I'm doing a report where I have a varied audience with technicians who want to know the technical specs of something, and executives who want to know what is the bottom line in terms of investment, then I can title my chapters Technical Specifications, Investment, and then those audience members could just flip right to that section. Adding information that readers need to understand your document. So check to see if key information is missing. Put yourself in the mind of the reader. What can I do to edit this to make sure that they understand all the key information? Is there a set of steps that needs instructions? Is there important background that can help beginners? If there is, but beginners are not the majority of your audience, put it in an appendix if you have a paper document. Put it on a separate section of the website, or another website page, or list a website that they can go to for more information. Do you need to define key terms? Do you need to list the actual words for an acronym you're using? And then also leaving out information your readers don't need. Unnecessary information can confuse and frustrate readers, but it's theirs. They might feel like they have to read it. So a theoretical instruction doesn't need to be in basic instructions, or a complicated process for repairing something could just be left out, and you can just say, if this breaks in this way, consult with an expert technician. Changing the level of information. So you might have picked the right level, but it might be pitched. You might have the right information rather, but it might be too high for your reader or too low on a technical level. This is a place where you're going to have to really think about who your audience is and revise your document. It also might be pitched at the wrong type of audience. So maybe you have it for an expert where really it needs to be a technician. Or maybe you have it for a technician with all these technical specs, and your executive just wants to know, look, what's going to be the investment? What's going to be the return on that investment? Is this going to generate income? How will it affect people in my company? Right? A lot of times this happens when product design notes are used as instructions. That can be really confusing for an end user. I don't need notes on the product design of my iPhone, right? I just need the instructions on how to get in there, change the settings, download apps, go online, make a call, and send a text. Adding examples or illustrations can really help your readers to understand. So one of the things sometimes I recommend, if you're writing something like manual and instructions, which we are going to talk about later this semester, do your outline first, do a pre-writing, outline everything, then write the instructions, then revise them for clarity, really go through and cut the sentences down, use stronger verbs, that kind of thing, and then add examples and illustrations, because those can help your readers to know what's going on. Examples and illustrations are one of the most powerful ways to connect with audiences. I really like this picture over here. I'm going to zoom in on it. So this is really, I think this might be from IKEA. It's really meant for people no matter what language they speak, right? This is saying this particular thing is way too heavy. It should not be done by one person. You need two people, right? I can see that just from this picture. Don't use it on a hard surface because it might break. So do it on a soft surface or a rug. And if you have questions that are not in your manual, you can always, there it is, you can always call IKEA for extra help. Then they have these pictures, very clear. I put together a porch swing recently that just had like legitimately lines and then numbers underneath the lines. And I was like, I don't know what kind of screw that is supposed to be. It's so confusing. And I ended up having to look online for help. So 16 of these, 16 of these, 44 of these wooden pegs, and 6 of these. It's really nice. And we talked about demographics. Well, IKEA sells to people of different languages, people of different cultures. And what I also like about this is these are very generic looking people, right? They're hitting that sweet spot of just having a generic looking person. Doesn't matter what race or ethnicity, and I can read or look at this illustration and I don't need to be an expert to understand it, and I also don't necessarily even need to speak English to understand it. Change the level of your examples. So you might be using examples that are appropriate for technical people but not necessarily appropriate for your readers. Highly technical ones might miss out on those non-specialists. So we're going to look at some examples of that in just a moment. Here we go. Instructions. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we will look at a couple things here. Number one, who might the intended audience be? These are real instructions for a food dehydrator. Number one, do not touch hot surfaces. Use handles or knobs. 2, to protect against electrical shock. Do not immerse the cord, plug, or dehydrator base in water or other liquid. You can tell just from those 2 sentences that it's really intended for a general audience. This is meant for an end user, a non-specialist rather. It's not meant for somebody who's a technician, right? A person who repairs food dehydrators or who builds them is going to know not to plug it in while it's immersed in water, right? They're going to know that necessarily. You'll notice that number 3, close supervision is necessary when the appliance is used by or near children. Again, a very general audience. Some people might be parents, some people might not be parents. So the author here has included this because, number 1, it's an important safeguard. And even if the majority of people don't have kids, it's something that even people who might, there might be a child in the home that day, they need to know. So we're reaching less knowledgeable readers by being very specific with our instructions. Do not touch hot surfaces, use handles or knobs. You can see those sentences are very short there in number 1. So our third question, could any sentences be shorter? Well, if you look at number 6, in the event the appliance malfunctions or has been damaged in any manner, return the appliance to the factory service department for examination, repair. Oh my goodness, that is a mouthful. I couldn't even get through it in one breath. So yeah, it definitely needs to be cut down a little bit. Are there terms that need to be explained further? Well, there aren't, but I would say there's a possibility that immerse, people might not know that word. So if I were writing this, I probably would have put, to protect against electrical shock, do not place into water, or do not put underneath, don't dunk it in water. There are some other, I'd have to kind of think about that if I were revising it, but that particular word might be something that some people might not know. I don't see really anything other than that. And we're also hitting less knowledgeable readers by referring them to the factory service department if there are malfunctions. So they're basically saying, look, you're not going to be able to repair this on your own, but if it does get damaged, if it stops working, if you have a problem with it, you can call our department and they can examine it, they can repair it, etc. So these are the instructions for a different food dehydrator. This is really, I say let's assume, but these directions are for people both in the US and Canada. And we have some things that are a little bit different to follow. So number 1, keep the Sedona on a level surface. Good. Kind of like the first one we saw, right? Keep it away from hot things. 2, keep it at least 10 centimeters away from appliances or other furniture. Now, the difficulty here is that 10 centimeters is used in Canada, but in the United States, we use inches. And then number 6, lay the food in rows, at least a 1-inch gap in between each tray. The other thing is here we have this 10 amp capacity for the outlet. So there's a few things that could be kind of confusing. For number 8. For number 5, cross-contaminate food, there are some people who may not know what that means. So really, this is a document that could be edited slightly and it would make a lot more sense and meet the reader's needs a little bit better. So let's revise for a U.S. audience. To reduce risk of fire, keep Sedona at least 3 inches away from appliances and furniture. They're in the red, as opposed to 10 centimeters. Cross-contamination occurs when bacteria is unintentionally transferred from one type of food to another. Do not cross-contaminate food. Use only with one type of food when dehydrating. For example, don't dehydrate both chicken and fruit at the same time. So that's a really good use of examples to clarify information. We have in the beginning of number 5 a definition, then the instructions, and then the examples. And telling the user, use only one type of food when dehydrating, to me, that's the most clear thing you can do. Oh, okay, I'm dehydrating steak. Oh, okay, I'm dehydrating apples. I'm not going to mix the two together. Number 8, so number 8 I struggled with because, a 10 amp outlet is pretty much just a standard outlet. But if the person did want to say something specific rather than just omit it, it could be written like this. Plug into a grounded receptacle outlet, not a 2-pronged receptacle. See illustration below. And then we'd have this little picture, right? Needs to have the 3, not just the 2. That, to me, is a lot more clear than saying 10 amp, which, quite frankly, I had to look up because I am not an electrician. And I was like, did they just mean a regular outlet? No, they meant as a grounded receptacle, which has the mouth, is what I like to call it, if we add a little nose here. The 3rd prong hole. That's basically what they wanted people to use. So now, These still meet the needs of the audience, but they're rewritten for clarity. So here's another example, a description. Ever wish you could know where your child is all the time? Using GPS in real time, Find My Kids helps you keep track of, and automatically locate where your child goes on with his phone. If he's traveling alone, you can confirm he's at a specific destination. Location info is never shared with anyone else beyond those who have permission to see it. Data is saved for later review. Free for the first 7 days. Monthly fee after the first week. Cancel at any time. So who is the intended audience for this description? This is the description of an app, and our audience is, boom, right here in sentence 1. Ever wish you could know where your child is all the time? It is for parents who are concerned about their children's safety if they're younger, and possibly if they're a little older and in their teenage years. This is a parent who just wants to know where their kid is and what's going on with their child, or their teenager rather. Is there any information that we could edit and add to explain things further? To me, I'm not a parent, but if I were going to use this app, I want to know, what does it mean beyond those who have permission to see it? Does that mean in my account that maybe myself and my husband would have permission to see it? Or does that mean whoever is at your company that has permission to see it? What does it also mean that data is saved for later review? Are you using that to just fix your app and make your location services and your GPS services better? Or are you reviewing it to see where children of a certain age go to purchase things? More often than not, it means the second thing. A lot of app developers have cheap apps, free apps, things that are only like 99 cents for the year for the entire app. But in reality, they're looking at your data, and then they're going to give that data to different companies. So let's say I have a teenage son and he goes to 7-Eleven twice a week, and then all of a sudden in his social media accounts there are ads for 7-Eleven. That's kind of how that works. So that really would need to be explained further, and you could probably find that in the privacy settings. This description is a little bit more generic. So where would you find this information? Probably on a website that's trying to get you to subscribe to the app, or subscribe to the app, since it has a monthly fee, right? There's a little bit of persuasion here within the description. It's not straightly informative. So here's another description. Again, not going to read the entire thing. This is for the same app, but there's some terms that indicate a more experienced or knowledgeable audience. So we have here geofence and movement notifications, iOS 8.3 or later. Some people might know which iOS they have. At least they would know which iPhone they have if they're trying to download onto an iPhone. Footprints, logs a waypoint. I'm not quite sure what that means. And then there's their tracking disclaimer. What are they doing with the waypoints? There are some terms that might need a little bit of explanation, and I picked this description because I think it's not a bad app, and I'm not saying that they're selling people's data. I'm just saying a lot of apps do that. This isn't a bad app, but I do think that even though this is written for a little bit more maybe knowledgeable audience, or at least it's a little bit more detailed for end users, I don't think it's really written that well. So this information you would probably find in the user agreement or in the more detailed description. And let's take a look at how we can rewrite some of this to be a little bit more user friendly. So the audience really should still be the same, and this is, again, one of those things where there's some technical specifications here that aren't necessarily for the parental audience, right? So here's the parental controls rewritten. Parental control feature allows for sharing locations at all times without a disabling option. And here's my rewrite. The app has a parental control feature that shares your child's location at all times. This cannot be disabled. It's the same information, right? But having it in 2 sentences, it just is a little bit more clear. It cannot be disabled, period. Without a disabling option is like, wait, is it my option? Is it the kid's option? It's confusing. You can use geofence to set perimeters on where your child can travel. If they go outside those boundaries, you will be notified. So this is a little bit more clear than geofence movement and notifications alert you when someone moves or crosses a fenced area. You'll also be notified when your teen is driving over the speed limit. Now, this is an important piece of technical writing, knowing where to put your bullets. Having the speed notifications and the geofence and movement notifications all together in one bullet, that's what could make it a little bit more unclear. So, and even, the wording there, speeding notifications can alert parents when teenagers go over the speeding limit. It's very, if you rewrite it to focus on the you or parents will be notified when their teens drive over the speed limit. That would be a good rewrite as well. Oops, devices. Use the app on your iPhone or iPad. All information syncs up so you can use the device at any time. As differentiated here from designed to sync seamlessly. Now, there are more words, but that word designed, this is for a user. They want to know practically how they can use it. So saying something like, you can use the device at any time, focuses on them more than just designed to sync seamlessly, which puts the focus on the app rather than the user. App runs in the background without draining your battery by leveraging Apple's significant location change technology. So let's look. Now we've got the heading battery use. The app runs in the background of your device. It does not drain your battery. It uses Apple's significant location change technology. This means that when your child travels between 1/4 and 2 miles, their location is significantly different than before. The app begins tracking their movements and it updates you regarding their new location. So this is a little bit more clear, especially for US users. 500 meters to 3 kilometers doesn't need to be in there. We took out that word waypoint, which to an end user isn't going to really mean much. And we've kind of explained now what Apple's significant location change is, and it does in a little bit more clear way. When they stop traveling, the app reverts or switches back to default mode, allowing it to work in the background without draining the battery. So here there's a little bit of repetition the same way as there was before, but the reason for that is because the draining of the battery is important to the users. So as opposed to just saying this provides a good balance of timely location without draining the battery, they don't really necessarily need that wording. So fixing it for a less knowledgeable audience in this case just means clarifying it, having more bullets, having a heading, and having shorter sentences. So how about a report for an expert audience? In addition to ACEs, parents also experience numerous risk factors associated with child abuse and neglect. This is from a Human Services report. Among 231 children with a closed CWS case at SBCT sites, over 90% had one or more parents with a substance abuse disorder. A couple more things highlighted here: impoverished households, SBCT involved parents, maltreatment, underreporting. Oops. So this is for an expert audience, but what if I'm going to break this down for a non-expert audience? What if I work in human services and this is a report and I have employees where they kind of need the information broken down in a more simplified way? All right, so here are my changes. First, the SBCT, the CWS, and ACEs are all defined in my first bullet. Safe Babies Court Team, Child Welfare System, adverse childhood experiences. Then I rearranged things because they had demographics mixed with risk factors, and it was kind of all over the place. So first I have parents had risk factors, mental health problems, domestic violence, jail time, and arrests, right? Demographics, 10% drug problems, 15% mental health problems, 28% domestic violence, and 14%, again, a recent history of arrests. Then I also defined young parent. Young parent was one of the risk factors, but they didn't really explain what that meant. Oh, so, to some people, a young parent would mean that they're under the age of 16. To other people, if they're having kids at 40, just about everybody else is a young parent, right? So a young parent here is defined as someone being under the age of 25. A large portion of at-risk children had parents below the age of 18. So young parent under 25, very young parent under 18. And impoverished is now defined as well. Now, we don't need to necessarily say most of the children came from poor households. We can still use the word impoverished. Most people know what that means, right? But the thing here is that, again, impoverished and poverty sometimes, for a lot of people in their heads, the way they picture it depends on context. If you make $20,000 a year, but you live on your own and you live modestly and you're kind of doing okay, you might see people impoverished who are homeless and have no income, right? If you make $50,000 a year, but you're totally in debt, maybe you see poverty a completely different way. So here we're using the federal definition, $17,000 a year for two individuals in a household. So hopefully you can kind of see the way that this is broken down for non-experts. We've taken acronyms and explained them. We've taken some terms like young parent, impoverished, and explained those. And then we've rearranged the information a little bit. First the risk factors, then the demographics, and then kind of explaining a couple more of the things there. You could also include a graph to illustrate the demographics listed. So if you wanted a graph to help illustrate 10% drug abuse problems, 15% mental health problems, a lot of these things are going to overlap, but a really nice chart could help to clarify the information. And in one of my later lectures, we're going to talk about visual rhetoric and how to create charts that will meet your audience's needs and help to inform them in a clear way. So how to create that chart or that graph. So here's a recap. Things to remember. Lead your audience through writing with headings, subheadings, illustrations. Paraphrase complicated information. So break it down just like I did on the last slide. Define any terms. Add information your reader needs. So things like acronyms, things like examples. Delete or omit anything your reader does not need. That includes repetition of things that don't need to be there at all. Change the level of your information to meet the needs and interests of your audience. So again, are you writing for that non-expert? Are you writing for an end user? Are you writing for an executive? You need to change the level of your information and the vocabulary you use. Go into more detail for a non-expert. Use simple sentences and short, clear words that, you really want to go for maybe 3rd to 5th grade reading level if you're writing instructions. So things like, do not immerse in water. Can you rewrite that a different way, or would that work well? It's kind of depending on who's buying that product, right? Use examples and then change the level of examples when needed. So thinking back to when we had the chicken and the fruit being dehydrated at the same time. No cross-contamination, right? If you have an expert, you're going to maybe just say no cross-contamination and you don't need an example. But having that non-expert, those examples can be really helpful. So I look forward to reading your work. You're going to be taking something for one audience and kind of rewriting it or translating it for another audience. translating it in a way, I just mean rewriting and revising and editing. And then in our next couple presentations, we're going to look at proofreading is coming up. We're going to look a little bit more at clarity, and then we're going to look at specific types of documents as well once we finish up this first part of our course with the basics. So that's it. If you have any questions, you can always email me, and I look forward to reading your work. Thanks.